Hello everybody, welcome back to the Ash and Stone channel. My name is Chris and today we're going to be looking at the first episode of my solo narrative campaign. So I'm excited, I hope you're excited. Anyway, let's introduce you to the forces and the scenario and we'll go from there.
Baridoc Kingsson of the Hammerheart clan is the fourth son of the King of White Peak. A life of luxury, malt beer and red meat isn't enough for Baridoc, and as the fourth son, he is unlikely to rise to King of White Peak. Gathering his loyal retainers, he sets off for the Silver Mountains and the fallen citadel of Storm Peak Hold. As the mountains loom ever closer, the prince and his oathsworn stumble across a human bird, currently under siege by a party of black stone goblins. This may be the chance he needs to start building an alliance and uniting the disparate dwarf clans in the area in order to retake Storm Peak Hold.
Alright, so for the forces of the Dwarves, we have Baridoc Kingsson of the Hammerheart clan and his retinue of 9 dwarf soldiers, the Hammerheart Oathsworn, with a detachment of 5 dwarf archers, and the potential allies of 10 human soldiers, the Stoney Creek garrison, depending on how courageous they're feeling. For the forces of the Goblin Raiders, we have 10 Goblin soldiers, another 10 Goblin soldiers, and 10 Goblin archers. So this shall be a siege relief scenario played on a 4-foot by 4-foot board. The forces of the Dwarves, the relief force, will be deploying 8 inches from the edge of their table, and the Goblins, the besiegers, will be deployed 8 inches from the edge of their tables facing the fortifications. Set up a forest on this side. That side of the board's really not going to be used very much at all. And the Stoney Creek garrison will not be deployed on the board. On the turn following a turn where the Dwarves and the Goblins both attack each other, the garrison will be able to make an activation roll with a -1 modifier. On a success, they'll be deployed at the front of the gate, and that'll count as their activation. And they will be allied with the Dwarves and acting with them for the rest of the game. They have a -1 modifier because it's safe behind the walls, don't you know? Alright, first things first, we're going to start with the initiative roll. Blue dice for the Dwarves and ivory for the Goblins. And the Dwarves are going to take it with a 10, but something happens on double 3s for the Goblins. Alright, so double 3s means that one of the Dwarves has been eating bad food on the march up here, and it's going to have -2 to its activation stat. So I think we're going to give that to the unit of soldiers, and I'm just going to put that token there, so hopefully I remember. So they will now be activating on a 6 for the rest of the game. Alright, well the Dwarves get the first turn, so they are going to start with the Dwarf soldiers. They'll be rolling 3 dice for their activation, needing 6s due to the +2, and an 8 and a 10 is going to allow them to activate. So they will be moving 5 inches directly forward. Followed by another 2.5 inches for their second activation. Second action, sorry. There we go, and that is the Dwarves activated. On to the Goblins' turn. It doesn't really matter which Goblin we activate first, so we shall roll a dice. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, and re-rolling 10s. So we're going to be activating the second unit, the Archers. So we'll roll an activation check for them. They will require 6s. There's an 8 there, so they successfully activate. And And the goblin archers will be wheeling on their front corner. No, wheeling on their back corner is their first action, and their second action will be to advance forward. Well, let's see what the range is like. They're out of range at the moment, so we're just going to move them forwards half speed, because they're archers, they don't want to get too close. We're just going to go forward 3 inches. That brings us back to the dwarves' turn. So the dwarves will be activating the archers. They are currently just within 6 inches of the prince, so they will be getting 3 dice for their activation. Requiring 4s, so they successfully activate. So they will be moving forward 5 inches. And we'll check and see if there is anybody in range. Definitely not. So they will move forward another 2.5 inches. Like so. Alright. Next up is the goblins. So we've got 2 units of soldiers left. It doesn't really matter which one gets activated first, so we're going to do the one on the left. 2 dice, requiring 6s. That's a 5 high, so unfortunately they do not successfully activate, but they still get 1 action this turn. So they will wheel from their corner. And the final goblin unit to activate using 2 dice and requiring 6s. There is a 10, that's a success. We'll move that tree out of the way. They will be wheeling on their corner. And they're advancing until they're within 1 inch of those archers. And here we are at the end of turn 1. So we're going to start turn 2 with an initiative roll. So the goblins are going to get that with a 3. So we look at the goblins, and the only one with any sort of advantage or disadvantage is going to be the goblin archers. If they successfully activate and move forward, they'll be within range to shoot something, so we're going to activate them first. A 10 will allow them to successfully activate. So they're not quite in range there. They will use their first action to move forward. We'll just do a half move. They should have done a full move last time, but there you go. And they will shoot at the dwarf soldiers. So the dwarf soldiers have shields, so there'll only be 4 dice. Goblins moved, so they have -1 to hit. They have an extra rank, so shoot 1 on defense 10 will give us 9s to wounds. There is 1 9 there. So one of the dwarves goes down. And the dwarves must make a morale check. They'll make that with 3 dice, because the prince is there, and they will make that at just their normal number, 4s. They succeed with a 5 and a 10. So we're then on to the dwarves' turn, and we will start by activating the dwarf archers. So they are within 6 inches of the prince, so they get 3 dice, and they need 4s. They succeed with an 8 and a 10. So the dwarf archers will be firing back, assuming they're in range, firing back at the goblin archers. They are just in range. A shoot value of 2 against a defense of 9 is going to give them 7s. We have 3 wounds there. So 3 wounds off the goblins means that they're going to make their check at -2. So 2 dice, and they will need 8s. And they are not successful, so the goblin archers become disordered. That will bring us to the goblins' turn. Both soldiers are fairly equivalent, so we're going to start with the one on the left again. Rolling 2 dice, they will need 6s. There's an 8, so they successfully activate. And they will be moving forward. 6 inches is their first action. And a further 3 inches as their second action. That brings us back to the dwarves. So for the dwarves, we will be rolling an activation for the soldiers. 3 dice, the -2 modifier for the food poisoning means they need 6s to activate. A 7 will allow them to successfully activate. So they will move 5 inches forward. And a further 2.5. Because we don't want to get shot to shit for too long. Right, and that brings us finally to the last goblin unit. We'll be activating on 6s. There is a 10. Now they will be moving in front of the archers. So they move a total of 9 inches. So there's the first 3. And a further 6 inches will get them there. Alright, so here we are at the end of turn 2. And we're ready for turn 3. Right, the start of turn 3. Because both elves and dwarves shot at each other last turn, we're going to roll to see if the humans have the courage to come on out. So they make an activation roll at -1. So they'll be needing 6s. There is a 10, so they successfully activate. So that means the Stoney Creek garrison form up outside the burr. But that counts as their activation for the turn. So now we're going to roll initiative. And it looks like the dwarves get it with a 9. So we'll start by activating the dwarf archers. They are literally just within 6 inches of the prince's unit. Literally just. So they will be activating with 3 dice. A 7 will successfully activate them. Now they'll be shooting at the closest target, which will be the goblin soldiers straight ahead of them. So the goblin soldiers have shields, so we'll be rolling 4 dice. Shoot 2 against defense 9, needing 7s. There are 2 10s there, so the goblins suffer 2 casualties. And must make a morale check at -1. So the goblins require 7s. There's a 10 there. They successfully pass the morale check. Alright, on to the goblins' turn. So this one has an advantage in that it can charge straight into the humans there. This one has an advantage because it may shoot, but it also has a disadvantage because it is disordered. This other one here has an advantage because it should be able to charge those dwarves. So it's looking like the archers are currently at the most advantage and disadvantage. They have the most tokens. So we'll be activating the archers first. The archers will activate on 7s because they are disordered. They successfully activate, so they are no longer disordered. And they were making a shooting attack over the goblins in front, straight into the dwarf soldiers. So they were making a shooting attack with 4 dice. Shoot 1, -1 for only being able to do a simple action. Shoot 0 against defense 10. They will require 10s to cause casualties. Nothing there. Next up to activate will be the dwarf soldiers. 3 dice because of the prince. And they require 6s to activate. They fail their activation. So they'll be doing a single simple action. They will just be wheeling to prepare for the next turn. Yeah. Because if they advance, they will likely get flanked by that second unit of goblin soldiers. So that'll do them. And which goblin soldiers are going to activate first? They both have exactly the same advantages. They can both charge. So we'll roll a dice and see who activates. 1 to 5, the left one. The left one will be activating first. So let's roll for activation. They require 6s. They successfully activate with a 7. And thus they will be moving straight forward 6 inches. Well, they may as well wheel. They've got the activations. They'll wheel and then move forward and charge into the humans as they come out of the burr. Right, so the goblins attack first. The humans, because they are defending their homeland and they have already activated, will decide to shield. So the goblins will get 4 dice for their attack. They are fight 1 +1 for having charged. So fight 2 versus defense 9, they require 7s. So we have 3 casualties to the humans there. And then the humans will fight back. They are fight 2 +1 for having an extra rank, but -1 for having already activated this turn. So they'll be fight 2 versus defense 9, needing 7s on 4 dice. And there is 1 there. So the goblins have won this round. The humans cannot be forced back, so we're going to move the goblins back 1 inch. And both units must make morale tests. So we'll start with the humans. The humans suffered 3 casualties, so they're at -3 for their test. They will require 8s. They succeed with a 9. And the goblins will take a test at -1 for their 1 casualty, needing 7s. And unfortunately the goblins fail their check. So they are both activated and disordered. Alright, and the final unit to activate this turn is the last remaining unit of goblin soldiers. So activating 2 dice requiring 6s. 9 and 10 will do the job. The goblin soldiers will be utilising the flow around rule to move around the fence in front of them. And they are going to use 2 actions to move the full 9 inches and move into contact with the dwarf soldiers. Alright, so the goblins with fight 1 have charged. So fight 2 in an extra rank, fight 3 against the dwarf's defense of 10. The dwarves, having already activated, are going to shield. So 4 dice from the goblins. Fight 3 on defense 10 is 7s. 3 casualties there. Ouch. Then the dwarves will fight back. The dwarves are fight 2 on defense 9, so they will require 7s with 4 dice, one of which will be the champion die. So needing 7s. We have 1, 2, 3 hits, double hits from the champion die. So 3 goblin casualties. So the combat was a draw. Both sides move back 1 inch. And both must make morale checks. So we'll start with the Dwarves. The Dwarves have -3 from suffering 3 casualties. So they will require 7s. 3 dice because the prince is in the unit. So they succeed. And the Goblins must make a check at -3, so the Goblins will need 9s. And the Goblins fail their morale check and are now disordered. And here we are at the end of the turn. Let's get cleaned up for the next one. Right, let's start the turn with an initiative roll. Initiative is going to go to the Dwarves with double 9. Let's find out what double 9 does. So, double 9's on the strange event table. Blessings of the Ancestors. Every unit in the army counts as having 1 additional level of shielding this turn. Evidently, the sight of the goblin blood being spilled last turn has brought the attention of the dwarven gods, and the dwarves are better protected now. Alright, let's start by activating the dwarf archers. They are in range of the prince at the moment, so they will get 3 dice to activate, requiring 4s. They successfully activate, and they can draw a line of sight from here to this side of the unit, so they will be shooting at those goblin soldiers. So the goblin soldiers will shield. So we have 4 dice. Shoot 2 on defense 9, they will need 7s. We have 2 8s there, so 2 more casualties to the goblins. We must make a morale check at -1. -2 for the casualties, and +1 for it being a shooting attack. So they require 7s, and they successfully pass. So they're not going to flee at this stage. Next up is the Goblins' turn, and we have to decide which Goblin unit to activate. Having a look at the situation on the field there, I can tell that the 2 soldiers are in the worst position, but they are about equivalent. So we're going to start with the larger unit of Goblin soldiers in an effort to save the larger unit. So let's see if they can activate. 2 dice needing 7s because they have -1 for being disordered. They do not successfully activate, so they remain disordered and may only make a simple action. So what they're going to do, not a lot they really can do, is just move back 3 inches and consolidate their position a little bit. Alright, back to the dwarves and the humans. Let's take advantage of those goblins having activated, and we will activate the humans first. So, 2 dice for the humans. They will require 5s to activate. They successfully do. So, they will be moving up to 6 inches directly towards those goblins. Alright, let's start with the humans. The goblins will be shielding because they're in a pretty bad way. So the humans are fight 2 versus the defense 9 of the goblins. So they will be requiring 7s. We've got 2 there, 2 8s. And the goblins striking back will be using 4 dice. They are fight 1, -1 for already activating, and -1 for being disordered. So they're actually -1. So -1 against defense 9 will be 10s to cause a wound. There is 1 10 there, so 1 human goes down. So, making morale checks. We'll start with the humans. The humans suffered 1 casualty, so they're at -1 for their check, so they will require 6s. They succeed with an 8. The goblins will make a check. They are at -3. 2 for casualties, 1 for being disordered, so they will need 9s. And they succeed. Excellent. So the humans winning the fight by causing 2 casualties versus the goblins 1 are just going to force the goblins back 1 inch. And it's now the goblins' turn, so they will be activating the goblin soldiers. They have 2 disadvantage tokens for being disordered and being able to charge, versus the archers having no tokens at all, because they currently cannot shoot anybody. So, rolling 2 dice to activate the goblin soldiers, needing 7s, because they are disordered. They successfully activate, so they are no longer disordered, but they can't charge, they can only do 1 simple action. So they are going to pull back 3 inches and try to further consolidate their forces. Next it's the dwarves and the humans again, and the only unit left to activate are the dwarf soldiers. So they will activate using 3 dice because of the prince there, requiring 6s because of their food poisoning. They successfully activate, and they will be attempting to charge these goblins. So they can move up to 7.5 inches forward. Easily get in there, and then we'll fight a round of combat. So the goblins will be shielding, having already activated. They're on fight 0 at the moment, so they're going to need 10s to do anything, so they may as well shield. So the dwarves will have 4 dice, including the champion dice. They have fight 2 against defense 9, so they will need 7s to cause casualties. There are 2 there, so 2 goblins go down. And the goblins strike back, 4 dice. Fight 1, -1 on 10s, so needing 10s. No casualties there. So the dwarves decisively won that. The goblins must now make a morale check at -3, because they no longer have a full rank, so the goblins will need 9s. Unfortunately they don't make it, so they become disordered. And the dwarves are going to push them back 1 inch to keep them within range. That brings us to the final unit to activate, which will be the goblin archers. So we'll roll 2 dice for them. They require 6s to activate. They succeed with a 9. And let's see what they're going to do. Right, so the goblin archers are currently just out of line of sight of anything. So they'll be using their first action to move 3 inches off to the side, which will then allow them to draw line of sight past the goblins in the front to the unit of dwarf soldiers. So 4 shots, -1 because the dwarves will be shielding. 4 shots, shoot 1 against defense 10, they will need 9s. -1 for having moved, they will need 10s. Unfortunately, there are none there. And this is how the field looks at the end of the turn. So let's start the next turn with an initiative roll. Looks like it's 9s for both sides, going down to the second dice. So 4 for the dwarves, taking the initiative. And the dwarves are going to start by attempting to activate the dwarf soldiers, requiring 6s because of the food poisoning. They successfully activate. We'll then use the action to move directly forward into those goblin soldiers. Alright, the goblins are in a bad way, but it's better to go down fighting than fleeing, so they will not be shielding this time, which means the dwarves are going to get 5 dice, including the champion dice. They have fight 2 against defense 9, so they will require 7s. That's a lot of hits. So we have 1, 2, 3, 4. So that unit of goblins is entirely wiped out. And because that unit was wiped out rather than fleeing, it does not cause cascading panic. If we look at our advantages and disadvantages, the goblin soldiers have a disadvantage for being disordered and being in charge range of an enemy, while the archers have an advantage for being able to shoot. So the soldiers have more tokens, so we'll be activating them first. So they require 2 dice to activate, -1 because they are disordered, so they will be requiring 7s. Unfortunately, they fail to activate, so they can still do a simple action, but they cannot charge, and they do not get rid of the disordered token. So what they're going to do is they're going to wheel on that front corner and try to position themselves so they're not going to get charged in the flank by those dwarf soldiers. Back to the dwarves and humans. The archers can now draw a line of sight. Let's check that they're in range. Just get it in frame there. They are out of range at the moment, but that's alright. We'll try to activate them. They are no longer in range of the prince, so we'll be using 2 dice, needing 4s. They successfully activate. And they will be advancing 5 inches. Which will then put them in range to shoot at those goblins. So 4 dice, because the goblins have shields. Shoot 2 against defense 9 is 7s. No damage caused there. On to the goblins' turn with the final unit to activate, being the archers. 2 dice, requiring 6s to activate. They successfully activate on a 7, and they will shoot directly at the dwarf soldiers. Shoot 1 on defense 10, requiring 9s. No casualties there. Then, as their second action, they are going to wheel to create a bit of separation and open up other targets. And so the final unit to activate will be the human soldiers, the Stoney Creek Garrison. I should probably get in the habit of using names rather than just titles. Alright, so they will be activating with 2 dice, requiring 5s. They successfully activate with a 6. They will be using their first activation to move 3 inches to the side. And then they will be moving directly forward. Which, because the leader is majority in the flank there, I think he's in the flank. Yes, he is majority in the flank. The unit will swing around there. These goblins are in for a bad time. Alright, the humans hitting the flank of those goblins. The humans are fight 2, +1 for flanking, so fight 3 against defense 9 of the goblins. The goblins cannot shield in the flank. So 5 dice. 3 on 9, requiring 6s. There are 2 casualties there. And the goblins will fight back with 1 dice, because they are flanked. So 1 dice, they are fight 1. They are disordered, so that's -1, and they have already activated, so that's -1. So they're -1 on defense 9, so they'll be requiring a 10. Almost, but not quite. So the goblins definitely lost that one there, so they are going to make a morale check at -3 because they no longer have a full rank. Sorry, -4 because they are disordered. So they will require 10s to stick around. And they do it. So the humans will push the goblins back by 1 inch. And that's the end of the turn. Here's how the table looks. Let's get ready for the next one. So we'll start the turn as always with an initiative roll. And the initiative goes to the dwarves and humans with an 8. And we're going to start by attempting to activate the dwarf archers. They are out of range of the prince, so they'll be using 2 dice, requiring 4s. They succeed with a 4. And they will be attempting to shoot from where they are at the goblin soldiers. So 4 dice because the goblin soldiers shield. Shoot 2 against defense 9. Means they will require 7s. No successes there. So that brings us to the goblins. Let's see how they are looking. So the soldiers have a disadvantage for being disordered, a disadvantage for being able to be charged, and that is in the flank, so that's a further disadvantage. Additionally, the dwarves look like they are in charge range as well, so I'm going to give them a further disadvantage. The archers have an advantage for being able to shoot a target. So starting with the unit with the most tokens, we're going to start with the goblin soldiers. And we'll be rolling 2 dice with a target number of 7 because they are disordered in order to activate them. They successfully activate on a 9. So they are no longer disordered, but they're in a bit of a shite spot. So I think their best chance of surviving is to move backwards 3 inches, which will hopefully get them out of range of the dwarves. There's not a lot they can do to escape from the humans, and if they attempt to turn to face them, they'll just open their flank up to the dwarves. So they shall move back 3 inches. On to the dwarves and the humans. So we will attempt to activate the humans and see if they can take advantage of those goblins. So they require 5s on 2 dice. They succeed with a 9. Here goes all hope for the goblins. So they use their first action to move 3 inches sideways, and then their second action to move 3 inches forward and plough into the flank of those goblins again. Right, so starting with the humans, fight 2, +1 for flanking, fight 3 on defense 9 of the goblins. The goblins cannot shield because it is the flank. So 5 dice, 3 on 9, requiring 6s. 1, 2, 3. And that cleans up that unit of goblins. Again, because they were wiped out, rather than running away, they do not cause cascading panic. The goblins charge in the flank do get a chance to retaliate, so I'll be rolling 1 dice for them. They are fight 1 on defense 9, having already activated as -1, so they require 9s. Nope. Alright, let's activate those goblin archers. 2 dice requiring 6s. They do not successfully activate, so they can only make a simple action. In this case, they will be shooting at the human soldiers, who will be using their shields, so the goblins will get 4 dice. They are shoot 1, -1 for failing the activation on defense 9, so they will require 9s. There is a 10 there, so the humans suffer 1 casualty. And they must then make a morale check at -1 for the wounds, but +1 because it is a shooting attack. It means that the humans require 5s. They succeed with a 6 and a 10. And that brings us finally to the last unit, the dwarf soldiers. So the dwarf soldiers with 3 dice will activate on 6s because their food has been poisoned. We have a 7 there and a 6 which is cocked, but a 7 will do the job. So those dwarf soldiers are going to wheel on their front corner. And then advance 5 inches. Let's go around that way. Directly towards those goblins. So that's the end of that turn. Let's get sorted for the next. So let's start this turn with an initiative roll. The dwarves and humans get it with a 9. And they will start by activating the dwarf warriors, well, the dwarf soldiers, who are sitting right in front of those archers. They get 3 dice because Baridoc Kingsson is right there. Activating on 6s because of the food poisoning, so they have a 6 and a 9. And they will be moving directly forward. Five inches, which will well and truly get them into those goblin archers. Right, so the dwarves are fight 2. The goblin archers cannot shield. So we have 5 dice, including the champion dice from the dwarves. Fight 2 on defense 9, they will require 7s. We have nothing there, they've bounced off. The goblin archers will strike back. They get 5 dice. They are fight 0 against defense 10. So they will require 10s to cause a wound. And nothing there. So that was a bit of a whiff. Both units are forced back 1 inch. And both units count as having activated. So next up we will be activating the Stoney Creek Garrison. 2 dice, requiring 5s. They succeed with a 6. They will be wheeling on their front corner. And then advancing 6 inches. And then finally, we will activate the dwarf archers. 2 dice, requiring 4s. They succeed with an 8. And they will be wheeling on their front corner. And advancing a mighty 5 inches. Alright, that was a rather uneventful turn. Here we are at the end of it. The goblins slowly getting forced back into the woods where the casualty pile is. Let's get set up for the next one. So as ever, we shall start with an initiative roll. We have a 9 from the dwarves, so they'll be taking the initiative again. And we'll be activating Baridoc Kingson's unit, requiring 6s because they have food poisoning. And they failed their activation. So they will just be sitting there because there's not really any point in them going anywhere. And that brings us to the goblin archers. The goblin archers will be activating using 2 dice on 6s. They successfully activate. And they're going to be a little bit cheeky. Note what they're going to do, move this tree out of the way, is they will pivot on their corner. A little more perhaps. And then they are going to move straight forward into the flank of the humans there, forcing the doors back an inch. They probably should have just shot, but anyway, they'll get 5 dice. They are fight 0, plus 1 for being in the flank. So 1 versus 9, they will require 8s to cause any casualties. There is a 10 there, so 1 of the humans gets cut down. The humans retaliate with 1 attack. They are fight 2 on defense 9, so they require 7s. And 8, so they do cause a casualty. So both sides cause a casualty. It's been a draw. They are forced back 1 inch. And must both make morale checks. So the humans are making one with -2. 1 for their casualty and 1 because they are less than a full rank. So they will require 7s. They succeed with a 10 and an 8. And the goblins will make a check at -1, so they will require 7s. And they succeed. So both units are now activated. And the final unit will once again be the Dwarf Archers. So they will activate with 2 dice, requiring 4s. They succeed with a 10. And they will just continue their advance. Advancing 5 inches. And then a further 2.5. Just like so, and that brings us to the end of that turn. Everything's closing in. Let's get ready for the next one. So, starting the next turn with an initiative roll. We have a 10 from the Dwarves and a 9 from the Goblins, so unfortunately the Goblins aren't going to be able to take it again. And we're going to activate the Dwarf Soldiers, Baridoc Kingsson and his Oathsworn, because they're on the flank of the Goblins, so needing 6s because they're still food poisoned. And they fail the activation yet again. Oh dear, they must be retching. Lovely. Okay, so the Goblins now get to activate. So 2 dice for that unit of Goblin Archers. They require 6s. They succeed on a 7. And once again, they are going to charge into the flank of those human soldiers. So they'll be getting 5 dice. Fight 0, +1 for flanking. On defense 9 means they require 8s. And there is nothing there. The humans will fight back with 1 attack. Fight 2 on defense 9, requiring 7s. And nothing there. So this round is going to be a wash too. Both units are forced back an inch, but there are no morale checks because there are no casualties. The humans, however, do count as being activated. And on to the final unit, which is the Dwarf Archers. They are now within 6 inches of Baridoc, so they will be using 3 dice to activate, requiring 4s. They succeed with an 8, so that was a close thing. And they will be advancing, so they are now within 3 inches of Baridoc Kingsson's unit, and they will be firing over the top and into those Goblin Archers. So 5 dice, shoot 2 on defense 9, means 7s. There are 4 casualties there. Ouch. Alright, so the Goblins now have to make a morale check at -5. 4 for casualties, 1 because they are less than a full rank. So they're going to require 11s. They've got that 10. Let's see if they can make that an 8. Nope, they are now disordered. I don't blame them. Okay, let's do one more and see if the Goblins can bring these humans down to the point where we might have to roll to see how damaged the unit is. So rolling initiative again. That is a 9. That's close enough. So the Goblins are going to take the initiative. They require a 7 to activate. They fail their activation, so they are disordered. So they will take 2 shots at those humans. They're in the flank, so the humans cannot shield. They get -1 for being disordered and -1 for failing the activation. So they are currently -1 against defense 9. They will require 10s. Nope. They count as activating. We'll get Baridoc Kingsson's Oathsworn to activate. 3 dice requiring 6s because of the food poisoning. They successfully activate. We're going to charge into the flank of those Goblins. 5 dice, including the champion dice. Fight 2, +1 for flanking, 3 against defense 9. They require 6s, and that's going to be enough to wipe them out. So that was a thing. Obviously, we won. It was very heavily balanced in my favour, so there wasn't really any huge doubt about that. But one of the really good things about Oathmark is that casualties can rack up very quickly. So it can be very swingy, and you can lose a unit like that. So that will be interesting going forward. Obviously, as the campaign further progresses, it'll get more and more difficult, and the odds will be more and more stacked in the enemy's favour. So that'll be interesting to see how we go there. Yeah, anyway, it went pretty well as I thought it did. I think the scenario worked fairly well. And yeah, anyway, let me know what you think down below. Thank you for sticking around to this point. I do hope you have enjoyed the video, and we shall see you next time. Cheers.